U.S. National Security Advisor Brzezinski flew to Pakistan to set about rallying resistance. He wanted to arm the Mujahideen without revealing America's role. On the Afghan border near the Khyber Pass, he urged the soldiers of God to redouble their efforts.
We know of their deep belief in God, and we are confident that their struggle will succeed. That land over there is yours. You'll go back to it one day, because your fight will prevail, and you'll have your homes, your mosques back again, because your cause is right, and God is on your side.
Our war on terror begins with Al-Qaeda, but it does not end there. It will not end until every terrorist group of global reach has been found, stopped, and defeated.
Somalia 1993, the Black Hawk Down tragedy, when Islamism declared war on West. And what changed the definition of terrorism forever? America got humiliated, watching terrifying, when the corpses of their soldiers were dragged over the streets of Mogadishu. This was the first shock after the Cold War, indicating that the history is not yet over, and the conflict that opened a new chapter, which led to a wider conflict, the consequences of which are still unforeseeable today. Why did this happen? Now the West is military undefeatable. All major conflicts during the last century had been taking place between Western powers. The jihadists realized that the only way for them to gain momentum is the so-called asymmetric warfare, meaning to target the weakens the enemy, not their strength. And a man whose name the world will soon know, and who has taken this warfare to a new level. But why did this happen? In communist China, Muslim Uyghurs are forced to consume pork and alcohol in re-education camps. Moreover, the Chinese Communist Party declared Islam a mental illness. In spite of this, no Western country calls China Islamophobic. No jihad or holy war is declared against China from any Muslim country. The anti-Western jihad is a stomach-churning hypocrisy that actually masks the real reason that Islamists have no answer to the unprecedented challenge posed to them by the very existence and way of life of the West. Afghanistan descended into chaos and madness during the civil war of the 90s. Various Mujahideen factions bombarded Kabul back to Stone Age, where the life became more and more uncertain and hopeless, and the survival of the inhabitants depended on the grace of warlords, criminal gangs and militias. Famine, chaos, insecurity and banditism triumphed all over the country. Women and children were abducted, raped in large scale, and forced to get married. During the day, criminal gangs rampaged, and after dark, the streets of Kabul were taken over by dogs, feeding on unburied corpses, precisely human flesh. The city was under de facto siege by its own militias, who had been heroes of the anti-Soviet war, and had now become mass murderers, terrorizing their own citizens, showing no compassion for the unfortunate starvation-weakened inhabitants, who continued their power games and intrigues in the name of their protection, while easily sacrificing tens of thousands of people just to extend their power to the newer districts of the city. At that time, a new phenomenon emerged in the southern metropolis of Kandahar, which, with the promise of peace, stability and, above all, law and order, brought 2/3 of Afghanistan under their control with unprecedented speed in just 2 years. The secret of the Taliban movement's success was the overwhelming support of the population, as a result of which they advanced in conquering the country like a hot knife through butter. Law and order, these two things that were not there at that time and which were needed more than anything else. The regime brought order, peace, and law, but at a price. Anything they deemed contrary to their interpretation of Islam was outlawed, and the laws were enforced with brutal cruelty. The tyranny and cruelty of the warlords was replaced by a religiously based dictatorship that had no international recognition, and was accused of training terrorists in the territories under its control. It is true that the laws of the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan were brutal, incomprehensible, and in many cases meaningless, but what everyone forgets is what all this resulted in: chaos, the cruelty of warlords, criminal gangs, and all kinds of anonymous militias. Mass rape of women and children, the total lack of public security, and complete helplessness. The other thing that the Americans ignored from the very beginning is that the Taliban was not an international terrorist organization. Unlike Al-Qaeda, the Taliban did not have global concepts and ambitions, their movement was very local. Osama bin Laden did not fight the Soviets with the Pashtun groups that formed them. Not a single Afghan, let alone a single Taliban, was among the perpetrators of the terrorist attacks in New York and Washington. And the American government made a mistake when it refused to negotiate with the Taliban regime. But the attack happened, and the enemy quickly emerged. The American public was hungry for retaliation, and for those responsible to be found and punished. The provocation worked, setting a dangerous precedent that began to erode the rule of law and trust in the institutions of free countries. The 21st century kicked in the door. For the first time in history, America has appeared vulnerable and defenseless. The United States has been attacked on its own soil for the first time. This cannot remain so. The government will receive all the support it needs from the public to eliminate the threat, to find and punish those responsible, and, if necessary, to carry out a preemptive strike against real or perceived enemies, individuals, groups, and even countries. The United States did not invade Afghanistan, at least not initially, but the overthrow of the Taliban regime had become a foregone conclusion, and as a result, CIA agents flooded the territories controlled by the Northern Alliance, providing support to the bloodthirsty and vengeful warlords against whom the Taliban had incited the population, returning them to power with air support. The regime was quickly overthrown in the framework of Operation Enduring Freedom. The main objectives of the war on terror were apparently achieved. A pro-Western puppet government was established in Afghanistan, and the democratization and reconstruction of the country began. What no one talks about, however, is that the astronomical sums of money that were spent on rebuilding Afghanistan and that were pumped into the country did not stay in Afghanistan. They ended up in the pockets of large Western corporations that undertook the reconstruction, overbuilt, built for a fraction of the amount, and then refunded the difference to themselves. The warlords who terrorized the population during the 90s became the new Afghan oligarchs and cronyists. The Taliban made one last desperate offer of talks in 2004, which the Karzai government ignored and the Bush administration consistently and categorically refused, saying they did not negotiate with terrorists. Then the well-known guerrilla warfare began, but this time not against the Soviets, but against the Americans and the Afghan puppet government. The Taliban took up arms. In 2004, the first free elections were held in Afghanistan, which seemed like a success story, but the problem soon became apparent. This result was not made possible by the efforts of the Afghan people, but by the order imposed and artificially maintained by American forces. The election was not the natural consequence of a natural process of civilization that had been taking shape over centuries, but the result of the intervention of foreign occupiers, while Afghanistan was inexorably drifting towards more war and destabilization. This led to the fact that by 2007 the Americans had to involve their NATO allies in policing, which was ISAF. The attempt to change a centuries-old archaic tribal society in a multi-ethnic country had failed, but the United States was about to make an even bigger mistake and drag America into an even bigger fiasco, when it turned its attention to Iraq. Why did the invasion of Iraq become the #1 priority for the USA in late 2002 and early 2003? We can guess only. But the simplest answer is because they could afford it. In the post-9/11 period they were authorized to wage any war. And war is needed to justify maintaining the world's largest force and military industry. Politicians also benefit from war because by influencing patriotic emotions, they can win the support of the masses, increase taxes, and nourish a war welfare state. The USA, is the #1 weapon exporter of the world. While there is a debate about a federal restriction on arms possession for private use, the US government sells weapons to China, Saudi Arabia, Singapore in large scale. None of these regimes is famous for respecting human rights. The US troops after liberating Baghdad helped zealously to fall the Saddam monument for the people, but they watched idly as the chaos prevailed with the collapse of the regime and free robbery begins. They had no strategy for organizing policing and maintaining the general security. If Americans thought everything would work further than before by regime change, everyone does their job the same way, goes to work as before, and nothing change will happen in society, they were mistaken fatally. By beheading the Saddam regime, they also beheaded Iraqi society at the same time. That's what we see in the news. It wasn't worth it at this price, not least because the war broke out under false pretenses. The intention of war prevailed. The mission had been undertaken. However, instead of stability, democracy, peace and prosperity, they left only chaos, destruction and disaster. Everywhere they put their feet, all that was left was a pile of rubble and hill of corpses. And this is not just the consequence of the past 2 decades, but of the past more than 100 years of modernization and centralization. Al-Qaeda, although not present in Iraq under Saddam's regime, established a base in Fallujah in 2004 after the fall of the regime, and then the US military administration began. In 2006, the year Saddam was executed, a civil war broke out between the majority Shiites and the minority Sunnis, in which the American, British and Polish occupying forces did not intervene. An unexpected side effect of the war on terror was that terrorism arrived in Europe, as a continuation of asymmetric warfare in a new area. The Madrid terrorist attack in 2004 was followed by the London bombings in 2005. And America and the West sank into a deeper quagmire, and they achieved what they wanted to avoid with the war on terror. The world became more dangerous and more countries were affected. Violence breeds violence, and it is ineffective against ideologies, if you do not feed them. Because ideologies are bulletproof. By eliminating 10 terrorists, you create 100, and if the civilian population suffers, which is inevitable in war, you create an infinite number of terrorists, by feeding the victim mentality and the martyr cult. Under the American military dictatorship, which they made Iraq into under the guise of democratization, anyone who had not previously sided with the terrorists at least sympathized with them. The Obama administration had no goal with Iraq, setting a complete troop withdrawal date of 2013, while focusing on Afghanistan, where there were already 100,000 American troops by 2010. Iraq was also transformed into a religious terror zone for Shiite mullahs, strengthening the position of Iran, the biggest sponsor of terrorism, with a guaranteed catastrophic outcome. And the worst was yet to come. Although the turning point of the Iraq War was Fallujah in 2004, nowhere were the American occupying forces more unpopular than in the city of Fallujah, where an angry crowd desecrated the bodies of American soldiers. The 1993 Somalia Fiasko, the ghost of Mogadishu, haunted the American public, and the emergence of an Al-Qaeda stronghold 40 miles from Baghdad was the communications nightmare of the American war propaganda machine, which made the main justification for the war an absurd conspiracy theory between the Saddam regime and Al-Qaeda. An interesting paradox of government involvement and the growth of bureaucracy, and at the same time its basic premise, is that the less something works, the more it is forced. The more catastrophic the outcome, the more money is poured into it to make it work. The main reason is always that the idea does not work because we have not done everything yet, we have not yet devoted enough resources to it. While in the competitive sphere, if something is proven to be unviable and not profitable, the sponsors immediately back away from it, but in bureaucracy it is the opposite. The more unviable the idea, the more it is supported, and this is no different with the financing of wars. The American war machine has spent trillions to finance its completely pointless war on terror, and because you can't invade an ideology, you have to invade countries. Conclusion: the war on terror does not work, and never ever worked even for a minute. Killing one terrorist creates 10 more. Violence breeds violence. In other words, war on terror breeds exclusively more terrorists. The proof for this is that after 20 years not only did that happen, the West failed to stabilize Afghanistan, but previously stable countries are destabilized by war launched or provoked by West, Libya, Iraq, Syria, etc. As a result of war on terror, those countries are considered a stronghold of terrorism, where they have never seen before. And no one took responsibility for the consequences anymore. And why anyone would have taken. Even being held accountable does not make anyone take responsibility. See Nuremberg trials, but the US president is as far away from accountability as possible. The responsibility belongs to the country, the office he served. By leaving his office, he leaves the responsibility behind, and lives a carefree life, while protecting from any impeachment and persecution. In turn, he takes with him the accumulated vast wealth and the network of economic relations he has built over the years. Last but not least, those who lobbied for war. They will never have to face the consequences of their actions: millions of deads and ruined lives, ruined countries, collapsed societies, economic crisis. Nothing motivates them to behave responsibly, but everything to more irresponsibility. It is simply not in the interest of any politician not to ruin their own country and everything they have an access to. This is the harsh reality. Here we are now. The intention of war prevailed. The mission had been accomplished. However, instead of stability, democracy, peace and prosperity, they left only chaos, destruction and disaster. Everywhere they put their feet, all that was left was a pile of rubble and hill of corpses.
In Ankara, I made clear that America is not and never will be at war with Islam.
By 2011, the mastermind of asymmetric warfare had been assassinated in Abbottabad, Pakistan, but it was too late. Al-Qaeda played no role in the Arab Spring, a series of uprisings that began with hunger strikes and overthrew regimes. The chain reaction had begun, and jihadism had mutated further into an ideology more evil than ever. The Arab Spring swept across the Arab world, but it soon became clear that it was more of a 30-year war in the Arab world than a social renewal. The West and international terrorism opened a new front in countries like Libya, Egypt, and Syria, where previously stable dictatorships had been replaced by chaos and civil war. The Arab attempt to democratize the West resulted in terrorist groups primarily attacking Western interests with Western weapons intended for the so-called democratic opposition. As the insurgency turned into a series of civil wars, another unintended consequence emerged: Daesh, better known as the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant. Led by al-Baghdadi, his forces carved out an area the size of Britain from Syria and Iraq, seizing cities, oil facilities, border crossings, and monuments. Destruction followed in their wake. The destabilized governments of Syria and Iraq proved powerless to confront the expansion of the caliphate. A new chapter in the history of the war on terror opened in 2014. How did we get to this point after 2001, when the West created a monster even bigger than Osama bin Laden, who kills everyone who gets in his way? When the United States realized how big the problem was, and that the main enemy was not the Assad regime, but ISIS, the expansion of the caliphate was already threatening the Iraqi capital Baghdad. That's when the Western powers decided to intervene and push Daesh back to Mosul in northern Iraq. At the same time, this was also a consequence of the sectarian conflict and division that emerged during the Iraqi civil war. While Aleppo, Syria, was reduced to a ghost town and the regular Syrian army lost control of a quarter of the country, the Assad regime was saved from complete collapse by its allies, Iran and Russia, who had their own ambitions in the region. The dictatorship of Bashar al-Assad avoided collapse, at least for now, but it came at a price. It had to give up all its sovereignty, and become a puppet of its allies. Russia extended its great power ambitions in the Middle East, towards Africa, and Iran, the #1 exporter of terrorism, gained a land link with its Lebanese proxy Hezbollah, and Iran became a de facto border with its archenemy Israel. Syria was a secular state, but the dictatorship had to live with the fact that the country became a staging ground for Iraqi and Iranian mujahideen and Hezbollah fighters. Syria, part of which has been under Israeli occupation since the 1967 war, the Golan Heights, now became an occupation zone for external powers such as Russia, the United States and Turkey, while the country's ethnic and sectarian divisions tore apart the previously fragile balance. The regime controlled less than a quarter of Syria, the rest of the country was under the control of various militias and foreign powers. In 2016, ISIS was driven out of Mosul in northern Iraq, following heavy airstrikes that destroyed much of the city and caused significant casualties. The caliphate was pushed back into Syria. After that, the mood in Iraq seems to have calmed down. The country is still far from being stabilized, but the federal republic that has been formed allows for the problems arising from ethnic and sectarian divisions to be resolved, and for peaceful coexistence to be possible. I would like to say that Iraq has overcome its difficulties and has become a better place with the fall of the Saddam regime, but we must not forget that it came after 15 years of hell and, above all, at a price. After the American military administration, the Civil War, the Shiite terror of Nari al-Maliki and the genocidal terror of Daesh, who, like the Bolsheviks, carried out the destruction of culture, millions have died and been forced to leave their homes, generations have been traumatized, and the country lies in ruins. Was it really worth this price to get rid of Saddam and his regime? Another unexpected side effect of the war on terror was the unprecedented wave of migrants from countries torn by civil war that flooded Europe in the mid-10s, bringing with them instability, conflict, and terrorism, which was evident in the 2015 Paris terrorist attacks. The fact that the migrants all claimed to be Syrian refugees, even though 90% of them are neither Syrian nor refugees, but almost all of them are Muslims, and yet rich Muslim countries like Saudi Arabia and the UAE did not accept them, says a lot about the hypocrisy and double standards of the Western left liberal policy of inclusion. If you say Africa is for Africans or Asia is for Asians, they are with you, but if you dare to chant that Europe is for Europeans, you are already racist. This is obviously a double standard, and there is a reason for it. The Western left do not advocate open society because they like diversity, or because they care about the third world emigrants, but rather because they seek power, they want new voters, and since the third world emigrants need big government, they live on welfare, they will vote for the advocates of big government to gain power, and so many political and economic interest groups via them. The idea that Europe's deteriorating demographic situation, which is deteriorating due to inflation, high taxes and the pension system, could be remedied by importing people who have not been able to live peacefully together in their own countries for thousands of years, simply doesn't work. It's not only cultural nihilism, but there's no empirical evidence for it, and the left knows it. They know that with welfare spending they're importing not the best, but the worst human resources. They know where this counter-selection is leading, and not only do they know it, but that's their goal. To turn the West into a radioactive wasteland and rule over the ashes.
So there's a second thing in that black box. An unrelenting stream of immigration. Non-stop. Non-stop.
And since there is an answer to everything, we didn't have to wait long for this either. One lesson from history is that every effect has an equal counter-effect, which in the case of the European migrant crisis meant the strengthening of nationalist populism and the electoral victory of parties that call themselves right-wing. Not because they are interested in reducing the role of the state in society, but primarily because their voting base is made up of white Europeans. But the truth is, without the structure created by nation-states, the globalists would have not even a slimmest chance to expand their influences globally, which is an inconvenient fact to both ideologies. But in reality there is only one ideology behind the concealed truth, the statism. The ruling elite survived the collapse of the Western civilization, our freedom did not. Ideology is not interested in cultural diversity and dialectal differences within a given nation, but in unification and standardization. What is achieved with forced integration? Then, a forgotten conflict that had started it all came back into focus. The new US administration had pulled out troops from Afghanistan in a matter of months, giving Afghan forces time to take control of the country. However, the processions did not give the appearance of an orderly transfer of power and military withdrawal, but rather resembled the fall of Saigon. Even the most optimistic estimates predicted that the Ashraf Ghani government would collapse within 6 months of the full withdrawal, but in fact this system proved so unviable that it collapsed even before the full withdrawal. Whenever we think we can no longer be surprised, we are always joked by our own self-conceit. And we must learn that painful lesson: there's no room for arrogance in interpreting history. Plenty of illusions collapsed with the arrival of the third decade of the third millennium, be it the Brexit, a pandemic, or Afghanistan. These are all events we can't even imagine shortly before. As surprising as it may be, the Americans had a chance to win the war with not ignoring the tribal structure and ethnic diversity of the country. No country can be changed by war, especially Afghanistan. Military solutions alone will not work in a country where raw military dominance doesn't matter. Each entity should have been allowed to walk its own path instead of being forced into a national unity government. The US missed an opportunity that was given in 2002 and received no more. The Afghans fed up with Taliban reign of terror. That's why the US was able to overthrow the Taliban regime so quickly. But after 20 years at war, everything had changed. And the Americans lost the war at the field of propaganda either. The Western-backed puppet government, which was one of the most corrupt by the way, collapsed even before the US withdrawal. Afghanistan does not give anyone a second chance, except the Taliban.
And every region now has a decision to make. Either you are with us or you are with the terrorists.
Commander-in-Chief, I have determined that it is in our vital national interest to send an additional 30,000 U.S. troops to Afghanistan.
The conclusion can be drawn for all American presidents, whoever involved in this conflict. Don't mess with Afghanistan. Final conclusion: what was the aim of the war on terror? Eliminating the potential threat what international terrorism poses, protecting the life of American citizens. And the best way to do this is eliminating the source of terror, eliminating the sponsors of terrorism, with rebuilding Afghanistan and creating a pro-American government, ensuring that the country will never host terrorists again. What has been achieved in 20 years? The provocation of the Islamists worked and drove the United States into an endless war. In the space of 2 decades, many more countries were affected by terrorism, and the world became a more dangerous place. By 2011, it became clear that the mission in Afghanistan was hopeless. NATO member states were backing down one by one, and the United States was left alone, looking for a way out. The goal then became the training and arming of the Afghan armed forces. The United States also realized that the Taliban were not the worst. What is more, their role was indispensable in terms of stabilizing the country. The warring parties were forced to negotiate with the Taliban in Doha, Qatar. There were fears that Afghanistan would descend into civil war, or worse, that parts of the country, or even the whole of it, would fall prey to ISIS and Khorasan, which had begun to emerge in Afghanistan, taking advantage of the weakening influence of the weak central government. This was achieved through the war on terror. The West clearly lost, but it would be a mistake to assume that the jihadists had won. They failed to consolidate their influence in any country. They were also pushed back in Syria, Iraq, and Afghanistan, and the Taliban is not considered a global jihadist movement. There were no winners in this war, except for the political and economic interest groups who lobby for the war to rebuild the countries, and who become richer with each passing day of the war. On the ideological front, it was a complete failure for both the West and the Islamic world. There is another lesson that Western society must learn: a mature society must separate people from ideas. People have rights, ideas do not. The rights of individuals are not up for debate, but ideas must earn respect through scrutiny and demonstration of their consistency with freedom, dignity, and equality. Some ideas stand up to scrutiny and emerge stronger. Others exhibit oppressive or sectarian characteristics that deserve criticism. Questionability does not mean that all ideas are equal. It means that all ideas can be scrutinized. So why does Islam often seem untouchable? It is because modern culture confuses criticism with hatred and caution with tolerance. The result is selective scrutiny. While some belief systems were endlessly judged, others are shielded from debate. If cancel culture claims to stand for accountability, the consistency is the real test. No ideology should be above questioning. Silence is not tolerance, and protecting ideas from criticism neither progress nor peace. Real peace comes when every belief system can be examined openly, honestly, and without fear. And another lesson for the United States, which is an oversimplified answer why they failed to stabilize Afghanistan. They had to lose the war, simply because they lost the heart of Afghan people.